The rain hammered the Brooklyn Bridge like machine gun fire. Alexander Wolf pressed his face against the helicopter's rain-streaked window, his knuckles white as he gripped the seat. Below, 6 cars lay twisted together like broken toys, their metal skeletons gleaming under emergency lights. Somewhere in that wreckage was his daughter. "Sir, we're landing now," the pilot shouted over the rotor noise. Alexander didn't wait for the helicopter to settle. He jumped out while the blade still spun, his $1,000 suit soaking through in seconds. The smell hit him like a physical blow. Gasoline, burnt rubber, and something metallic that made his stomach clench. The overturned taxi was yellow metal scraped down to bare steel. His 8-year-old daughter's piano lesson bag lay scattered on the wet asphalt, sheet music dissolving in the rain. Then he saw her. A woman knelt beside the wreckage in blood-stained scrubs, her hands steady on a small figure in a pink hoodie. Too much blood pooled around them, mixing with rainwater and engine oil. But the woman's voice cut through the chaos, soft, sure, unbreakable. "Breathe with me, sweetheart. In and out. Your daddy's coming, I promise." Alexander's legs nearly gave out. "Lily." The woman looked up, and he saw eyes the color of earth after rain, brown and deep and completely calm in the middle of hell. Her dark hair plastered to her skull, her hospital scrubs torn and stained crimson. "Are you her father?" "Yes." "How bad is she going to?" "Broken tibia, possible internal bleeding. But she's stable." The woman turned back to Lily, never letting her hands stop their steady pressure on the wound. "See, honey? I told you he'd find you." Lily's eyes fluttered open, unfocused but alive. "Daddy." Alexander dropped to his knees on the broken glass, not feeling the cuts through his pants. "I'm here, baby girl. Right here." "This is Margot," Lily whispered. "She told me stories about butterflies while we waited." "Margot." The stranger holding his daughter's life in her blood-stained hands had a name. When the paramedics arrived, Margot didn't move until they physically took over. She stood slowly, her scrubs dark with blood that wasn't hers, her hands finally shaking now that the crisis had passed. "Thank you," Alexander said, but the words felt pathetic. Inadequate. She nodded once. "She's going to be fine." St. Mary's Hospital at 3 a.m. was a fluorescent purgatory. Alexander had been pacing the surgical waiting room for 4 hours, his security team stationed at every entrance, his assistant fielding calls from lawyers and publicists. The best pediatric surgeons in the country were on standby. His wealth could buy the finest care, the most advanced equipment, the most comfortable rooms. But none of it could reach into that operating room and fix his daughter's broken bones. He found Margot by the vending machine, still in her bloody scrubs, staring at rows of snacks like they contained the meaning of life. "Your shift ended hours ago," he said. "I know." She selected a bag of pretzels and offered him some. He shook his head. "I wanted to make sure she was okay." "Why?" Margot opened the bag slowly. "She reminds me of someone I lost." The words hung between them like a confession. Alexander waited. "My sister Emma. She was 13 when she died. Car accident." Margot's voice was steady, but her hands weren't. "I was driving. Drunk driver ran a red light on Michigan Avenue. I walked away without a scratch. She didn't." Alexander felt something shift in his chest. Recognition. The particular kind of grief that came from surviving when someone you loved didn't. "That's why you became a nurse. Trying to save all the sisters I couldn't save." She ate a pretzel mechanically. "Your turn." "I know who you are, Alexander Wolf. Real estate empire, Fortune 500, widower. Your wife died 2 years ago. Elise." Her name still felt like swallowing glass. "Blood clot." She was making coffee Tuesday morning, talking about repainting Lily's room. Then she just stopped. Collapsed right there on the kitchen tiles. No warning. None. The paramedic said she was probably dead before she hit the floor. He stared at the vending machine's humming lights. I never got to say goodbye. Never got to tell her I loved her one last time. Margot nodded. The worst kind of ending. They stood in comfortable silence, two people who understood that some wounds never fully healed. I'd like to thank you properly, Alexander said finally. Dinner. Whatever you'd prefer. Margot studied his face with those earth-brown eyes. You don't owe me anything. I want to. Something flickered across her expression. Surprise. Maybe fear. All right. The restaurant was too expensive for a first date, but Margot didn't seem intimidated. She wore dark jeans and a simple white blouse, no jewelry except a thin silver chain. Somehow she looked more elegant than every socialite who'd ever tried to impress him with designer gowns and perfect smiles. I don't usually do this, she said, cutting her salmon into precise pieces. Eat dinner. Let billionaires take me to restaurants where the wine costs more than my car payment. She smiled. Without running extensive background checks first. Alexander laughed. Actually laughed. When was the last time someone had made him do that? What's your instinct telling you? That you're either exceptionally good at pretending to be human, or you actually are one. They talked about books. She loved mystery novels. He preferred biographies. Music. She had every Nina Simone album. He'd seen Dylan live 17 times. How they both despised small talk and networking events and people who said we should do lunch but never meant it. Elise used to say I was allergic to phoniness, Alexander said, then stopped. He hadn't talked about his wife on a date since she died. Hadn't been on a date, period. What was she like? Beautiful. Brilliant. She could walk into a room full of strangers and have them eating out of her hand within 10 minutes. Everything I'm not. What do you mean? Alexander swirled his wine. She made it look effortless. The charity galas, the society pages, playing the perfect CEO's wife. I built the empire, but she built the image. Sounds lonely. What? Having to be perfect all the time. For both of you. The observation hit him like a punch to the chest. He'd never thought of it that way. She died on a Tuesday, he said suddenly. I was in Singapore closing a deal. She texted me a picture of paint samples for Lily's room at 9 a.m. By 9:47, she was gone. Margot set down her fork. I'm sorry. I stopped believing in timing after that. In the idea that everything happens for a reason. And second chances? Those two. She met his eyes. Maybe we both need to reconsider. Alexander walked Margot to her car in the restaurant's underground garage. No kiss, no dramatic gesture, just two people who had found something unexpected in each other's brokenness. Can I see you again? He asked. I'd like that. But the next day, Margot didn't come to check on Lily. Or the day after. When Alexander asked the charge nurse, she just shrugged. Margot took emergency personal leave. Family matter, I think. 3 days later, a letter appeared under his penthouse door. No return address, just his name in careful handwriting. Alexander, I didn't mean to get so close. I didn't expect Lily to remind me so much of Emma, or for you to make me hope for things I thought I'd given up on. I care more than I should, and that terrifies me. I'm leaving before I destroy something good again. Margot. Alexander read the letter 5 times before the words sank in. She was gone. Just like Elise, just like everyone who mattered. Except this time, someone had chosen to leave. He found Lily in her room, carefully arranging get-well cards on her nightstand. Where's Margot, Daddy? She promised to teach me how to make friendship bracelets. Alexander sat on the edge of her bed, the letter crumpled in his fist. She had to go away for a while, sweetheart. When is she coming back? He looked at his daughter, this brave little girl who had already lost one mother and was now losing another. I don't know. Did she stop loving us? The question hit him like a blade between the ribs. No, Lily. She didn't stop loving us. Then why did she leave? Alexander had no answer for that. None that made sense to an 8-year-old, anyway. That night, he made a decision. He'd spent 2 years letting life happen to him, accepting loss as inevitable. Not this time. Finding Margot Bennett wasn't difficult when you had unlimited resources. She lived in a Fort Greene brownstone, had grown up in Chicago, worked trauma units across the country before returning to New York when her father was diagnosed with lung cancer. He'd died 8 months ago. No siblings. No spouse. No children. Always alone. She didn't answer the first time you knocked. Or the second. But on the third attempt, the door opened just wide enough to reveal one brown eye and a slice of her face. You found me. You didn't leave me much choice. I thought I was protecting you. From what? From caring about someone? From letting someone care about you. She opened the door fully. Barefoot, wearing an oversized Columbia sweatshirt. No makeup. Still the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen. Her apartment was small but lived in. Books stacked on every surface, plants crowding the windows, medical journals mixed with poetry collections. A faded photograph on the mantel showed her with a girl who had the same wild smile and defiant eyes. "That's Emma," Margot said, following his gaze. She wanted to be a veterinarian. Had already picked out the college, planned her whole future. You were just kids. I was 16. Old enough to drive. Old enough to be responsible for keeping her safe. Margot's voice cracked. It was snowing and I was going too fast. When that drunk driver ran the light, I couldn't stop in time. It wasn't your fault. I've spent 15 years in trauma units trying to make up for it. Saving other people's sisters, other people's daughters. But it never brings her back. Alexander crossed the room and sat on her couch. And now you think you don't deserve to be saved yourself? Tears filled her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. I think I don't know how to be with someone like you without ruining everything. Then we'll figure it out together. She looked at him for a long moment, searching his face for lies or false promises. Whatever she found there must have been enough, because she stepped forward and let him pull her into his arms. They took it slow after that. Margot didn't move in, didn't quit her job, didn't let Alexander wrap her in the safety net of his wealth. But she came to dinner twice a week. She helped Lily with homework and taught her card tricks. She showed Alexander how to braid friendship bracelets and laughed when he got frustrated with the tiny beads. Lily adored her. Alexander was falling deeper in love every day. And for the first time since Elise died, the future felt possible. Margot had nightmares sometimes, dreams where she was 16 again, where she couldn't stop the car, couldn't save Emma. Alexander would wake to find her sitting by the window at 3 a.m., staring out at the city lights. "Want to talk about it?" he'd ask. Same dream. Different ending every time. Sometimes I save her. Sometimes I die too. Sometimes we both live, and she's 30 now with kids of her own. Which ending hurts most? The ones where she lives. Because then I have to wake up and remember she's gone all over again. Alexander told her about his own nightmares, the ones where he got home from Singapore in time to save Elise, where he performed CPR and brought her back, where they grew old together watching Lily graduate and get married and have children of her own. "Survivor's guilt is a son of a bitch," Margot said one night. "Is that what this is? You survived losing her. I survived the crash. Sometimes the hardest part isn't the dying, it's the living afterward." They were learning each other's damage, the specific ways grief had carved them hollow. And somehow, in the sharing, they were both becoming whole again. The phone call came on a gray Thursday morning. Alexander was drinking coffee on his terrace, reading the Times, when his phone buzzed with an unknown number. "Mr. Wolf? You don't know who she really is." Alexander's grip tightened on the cup. "Who is this?" "Someone who's watched Margot Bennett destroy lives before. Ask her about Danny Morrison." Ask her what really happened in Chicago before she ran to New York. The line went dead. Alexander sat frozen, coffee growing cold in his hands. Danny Morrison. The name echoed like a ghost, and suddenly Margot's careful distance from her past made perfect sense. There was more to her story, more she hadn't told him. That evening, he watched her help Lily paint watercolor butterflies at the kitchen table. Watched how she bit her lip when concentrating, how she laughed just a beat too late at Lily's jokes, how her face went pale when he casually mentioned Chicago in conversation. He didn't want to doubt her. But the voice on the phone, the way Margot flinched at mentions of her old city, it was eating at him like acid. "Everything okay?" Margot asked, noticing his stare. "Fine. Just thinking about work." She didn't believe him. He could tell by the way her shoulders tensed, the way she started cleaning up the art supplies with sharp, efficient movements. "I should go," she said. "Early shift tomorrow." "Margot." "It's fine, Alexander. We're fine." But they weren't, and they both knew it. The next morning, Alexander did something he hated himself for. He called Marcus Chen, his head of private security. "I need you to look into someone," he said, the words tasting like betrayal. "Margot Bennett. Everything. Chicago especially. Personal or professional?" "Personal." "And Marcus?" "Keep this between us." The file arrived that afternoon, a manila envelope thick with photocopied documents and printed emails. Alexander read it alone in his office, his hands shaking. Subject: Margot Elizabeth Bennett, RN relocated from Chicago to New York, March 2021, previously employed, St. Michael's Trauma Center, Chicago. Reason for departure: voluntary resignation following internal investigation. Case details: inappropriate relationship with patient Daniel Morrison, firefighter, age 29, patient admitted, critical burns, 40% of body relationship. Timeline: patient and subject had prior romantic involvement. Professional misconduct: failure to recuse self from case, excessive. Personal involvement during treatment. Outcome: patient death during recovery. Sepsis infection. Legal action: wrongful death lawsuit filed by Morrison Family Settlement, $2.3 million, sealed agreement. Professional consequences: nursing license suspended, Illinois, reputation compromise. Relocation, recommended by legal counsel. Alexander closed the file and stared out at the Manhattan skyline. She hadn't lied exactly, but she hadn't told him everything either. The woman he was falling in love with had secrets, professional failures, dead patients, sealed settlements. How well did he really know her? Alexander didn't call Margot that night. Didn't text when she sent her usual good-night message. Didn't answer when she called the next morning to check on Lily. By evening, she was at his door. She stood in his foyer soaked from the rain. No coat, just fury and heartbreak in her brown eyes. "I know you know," she said. He stepped aside to let her in. "Someone called me. Told me to ask about Danny Morrison. So you had me investigated instead of just asking." "Yes." The honesty seemed to hit her like a physical blow. She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly looking very small in his enormous living room. "You had a relationship with a patient," Alexander said. "No." Her voice was fierce. "I loved someone who was dying. Someone I'd known for 2 years before he ended up in my trauma unit with burns over half his body. But you stayed on his case. I tried to get reassigned. They were short-staffed, said I was the most experienced burn nurse they had. I should have fought harder." "What happened?" Margot's composure cracked. "He died, Alexander. Danny died because he developed sepsis, and the doctors missed it. I wasn't his doctor. I was just the nurse who held his hand through the worst nights, who talked to him when the pain was unbearable, who loved him enough to make professional mistakes. His family sued you. They needed someone to blame. I was the easiest target, the nurse who got too close, who crossed lines that shouldn't be crossed." Tears ran down her cheeks. I didn't fight the lawsuit because part of me believed I deserved it. Why didn't you tell me? Because it doesn't define me. Because it almost destroyed me. Because I wanted one thing in my life that wasn't tainted by that chapter. Her voice broke. Because I was terrified you'd look at me exactly the way you're looking at me now. Alexander studied her face, searching for deception, for manipulation. All he saw was pain. Raw, honest, devastating pain. I don't know what to do with this, he said finally. Margot nodded slowly. Then I'll make it easier for you. She turned toward the door, but he caught her arm. I didn't say I wanted you to go. You didn't say you wanted me to stay either. He let her go. The sound of the door closing behind her echoed through the penthouse like a gunshot. 2 weeks passed in gray silence. Lily kept asking when Margot was coming back. Alexander buried himself in work, tried to convince himself he'd made the right choice. But every night when he closed his eyes, he saw Margot in that doorway, soaked, shaking, begging him not for forgiveness but for understanding. Then a package arrived at his office. No return address, no delivery signature. Just a manila envelope with his name typed on a label. Inside were photographs that made his blood turn to ice water. Elise, his beautiful, perfect, dead wife, holding hands with a man Alexander didn't recognize. Kissing someone in Central Park who wasn't her husband. The photos were date-stamped 3 weeks before her death. Attached was a single sheet of paper. You're not the only one who's been lied to. Elise wasn't who you thought she was. But you loved her anyway. Why are you holding Margot to a higher standard than the dead? Alexander's hands trembled as he stared at the images. Elise laughing with another man. Elise's hand on someone else's chest. Elise, who had died with secrets Alexander never knew she carried. He'd spent 2 years grieving a perfect love story that had never existed. The office door felt miles away. His legs barely carried him to the executive bathroom, where he vomited until there was nothing left but bile and the bitter taste of betrayal. When he finally looked in the mirror, he saw a man who had judged others for the very sins his own wife had committed. A man who had thrown away something real because he was chasing the ghost of something that had been a lie. That night, Alexander booked a flight to Chicago. As the plane lifted off from LaGuardia, he clutched 2 things. The photographs of Elise's betrayal and a picture of Margot teaching Lily to paint watercolors. He didn't know what he was going to say when he found her. He just knew that if he didn't try, if he didn't fight for her, he'd regret it for the rest of his life. Chicago was gray and bitter cold, matching his mood perfectly. The address his security team had provided led to a narrow house in Lincoln Park with blue shutters and a front garden choked with dead roses. Margot answered the door on the 3rd knock, wearing a sweater 3 sizes too big and jeans with paint stains on the knees. Her hair was pulled into a messy bun, and her eyes were red-rimmed from crying or lack of sleep. I thought I left you in New York, she said softly. I don't think I ever really let you go. She stepped aside without a word. The house smelled like old books and lemon oil, like memories that had been carefully preserved but never revisited. Photo albums were scattered across the coffee table. Pictures of her and Emma building snowmen, carving pumpkins, laughing at some shared joke that would never be told again. I came to pack up Emma's things, Margot said. Mom kept her room exactly the same after the accident. I've been saying I'd deal with it for 15 years, but I never could. Alexander picked up one of the photographs. 2 girls with matching smiles and mischievous eyes. She looks just like you. Everyone said that. Sometimes I think that's why I became a nurse, to try to save all the Emmas I meet. And Danny? Margot's jaw tightened. Danny was trying to save someone else when he got burned. A family trapped in a house fire on the south side. He was off duty, just driving by, but he went in anyway. That's who he was, someone who couldn't walk past suffering without trying to help. You loved him. I did. But not the way I love you. The words hit Alexander like lightning. Present tense. She still loved him, even after everything. I was wrong, he said. About everything. About you. About me being damaged goods. About thinking perfection was possible. About thinking love meant never being hurt. He pulled out the envelope containing Elise's photos. My perfect wife was having an affair. 4 months before she died. Margot opened the envelope with shaking hands. Her face went pale as she looked at the images. Alexander. I loved her anyway. Even with her secrets, even with her lies, I loved her. And here I am, judging you for being human while I put a dead woman on a pedestal she never asked for. Tears spilled down Margot's cheeks. I'm not asking you to love me despite my past. I know. You're asking me not to use it as a weapon against you. He stepped closer. I'm scared, Margot. Terrified of losing someone again. But I'm more scared of losing you because I was too much of a coward to believe in what we could have. She looked at him for a long moment, searching his face for truth. Whatever she found there must have been enough, because she dropped the photographs and threw her arms around his neck. He caught her like he'd been waiting his whole life to do exactly that. They talked through the night, lying on the floor of Emma's childhood bedroom, surrounded by memories and moonlight streaming through lace curtains. They talked about Lily, about what it would mean for Margot to come back to New York, about whether broken people could really build something lasting together. I want to try, she said as dawn broke over the Chicago skyline. I'm terrified, but I want to try. So do I. But as they held each other in the growing light, neither of them knew that someone back in New York was already planning their destruction. 3 weeks later, they were back in Manhattan. Lily ran into Margot's arms the moment she saw her at the airport. Don't leave again, Lily whispered against her shoulder. I won't, Margot promised. Not ever again. Alexander watched from a few feet away, his heart so full it felt like it might burst. They had a long way to go, all of them. Trust was fragile, love was complicated, and the past had a way of reaching into the present when you least expected it. But they had something now that felt stronger than fear. They had truth. Margot moved into the penthouse slowly, bringing pieces of herself bit by bit. Her coffee mug, her medical journals, the photograph of Emma that she placed on Alexander's nightstand like a blessing. They were building something together, not perfect, but real. And then 6 months later, everything changed again. Margot stared at the pregnancy test in her hands, her heart hammering against her ribs. 2 pink lines, clear as daylight, impossible to misinterpret. She was pregnant. After everything, the loss, the fear, the careful reconstruction of her heart, she was going to be a mother. She wanted to run to Alexander immediately, to share this miracle with the man she loved. But her shift at the hospital was starting in an hour, and there had been a multi-car accident on the FDR Drive. They needed every available nurse. She slipped the test into her purse and left a note, emergency at hospital. Home tonight. Love you. The accident was brutal. A family of 4, a drunk driver, chaos that reminded her too much of Emma, of Lily, of all the people she couldn't save. Margot worked for 14 hours straight, her secret burning in her chest like a small, precious flame. She was going to tell Alexander over dinner. Maybe with champagne, sparkling cider for her. Maybe with flowers. Maybe just with the test itself, placed on the table between them like a promise. But when she got home, exhausted and still in her scrubs, Alexander was waiting in the living room with a tumbler of whiskey and a face like carved stone. We need to talk, he said. Margot's heart plummeted. What's wrong? Vincent Hale called me today. The name hit her like a physical blow. Vincent. Her mistake from a year ago, before she'd ever met Alexander, before she'd known what real love felt like. Alexander. He says you two dated. For 3 months last year. The pregnancy test felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds in her purse. It wasn't serious. He says you ended things when you found out he worked for me. That you specifically said you didn't want to be involved with anyone connected to my world. Margot sank into a chair, the room spinning slightly. That's not the whole story. Then tell me the whole story. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've been lying to me from the beginning. It looks like you targeted me through Vincent. That's not true. The words came out sharper than she intended. I met Vincent at a hospital charity gala. We went on a few casual dates. When I realized he worked for you, before I ever met you, I ended it because I didn't want complications. Complications? Yes. I didn't want to date someone whose boss was Alexander Wolf because I knew exactly how that would look. Like I was using him to get to you and your money. Alexander stood up, began pacing like a caged animal. But you never mentioned it. In all our conversations about honesty and trust, you never thought to bring up the fact that you dated my CFO. Because it didn't matter. By the time I realized who you were, Vincent and I had been over for months. It matters to me. And there it was, the same pattern, the same doubt, the same assumption that she was hiding something sinister. Margot felt something crack inside her chest, like ice breaking under pressure. I'm pregnant, she said quietly. Alexander stopped pacing. The whiskey tumbler slipped from his hand, shattering on the marble floor. What? I found out this morning. 6 weeks along. She pulled the test from her purse with shaking hands. I was going to tell you over dinner, maybe with flowers, maybe just with this. She set the test on the coffee table between them like evidence in a trial. Alexander stared at it, his face unreadable. Pregnant. I know the timing is terrible. I know you have doubts about me again. But I wanted you to know. Silence stretched between them like a chasm. Margot could hear her own heartbeat, could hear the city breathing 20 stories below. Say something, she whispered. Alexander looked up at her, and for a moment his face softened completely. Are you okay? How are you feeling? Scared? Happy? Terrified? Like everything just changed? She paused. Like maybe we just changed. He sat down heavily, his head in his hands. I don't know what to think anymore, Margot. Every time I start to trust completely, something else surfaces. Some other piece of your past that you forgot to mention. So what are you saying? I'm saying I need time to process this. All of it. Margot nodded slowly. She understood. But understanding didn't make it hurt any less. I'll stay at Sarah's tonight, she said, referring to her friend from the hospital. You don't have to. Yes, I do. We both need space to think. She packed a small bag while Alexander sat at the kitchen table, staring at the pregnancy test like it might give him answers to questions he didn't know how to ask. At the door, she turned back one last time. For what it's worth, I never lied about loving you. That was always real. 3 days passed in agonizing silence. Alexander threw himself into work, taking meetings he didn't need, reviewing contracts that didn't require his attention. Anything to avoid thinking about Margot, about the baby, about the mess he'd made of everything that mattered. Lily noticed immediately. Where's Margot? She asked over breakfast on Saturday morning. She's staying with a friend for a few days. Why? Alexander looked at his daughter, this smart, intuitive little girl who'd already been through too much loss. We had a disagreement. About what? Adult things. Lily frowned, pushing her cereal around the bowl. Are you going to break up with her like Tommy's parents did? The question hit him like a punch to the solar plexus. I don't know, sweetheart. But you love her. Yes. And she loves us. Yes. Then why would you break up? Out of the mouths of babes. That afternoon, Alexander's assistant buzzed his office intercom. Sir? Vincent Hale is here to see you. He says it's urgent and personal. Alexander's jaw tightened. Send him in. Vincent walked into the office looking like he hadn't slept in days. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his expensive suit wrinkled. Most unusual of all, he looked nervous, and Vincent Hale was never nervous. "We need to talk," Vincent said, closing the door behind him. "If this is about your relationship with Margot, it's about why I told you about it." Vincent sat down uninvited, his hands shaking slightly. "And why I've been feeding you information designed to make her look suspicious." Alexander went very still. "What are you talking about?" "The anonymous phone call about Danny Morrison. The tip about her past in Chicago. That was me." Vincent's voice was barely above a whisper. "I hired a private investigator months ago. I've been systematically trying to destroy your relationship." Alexander's hands slowly curled into fists. "Why?" "Because I'm in love with her, and she chose you. Because you have everything. Money, power, respect, a beautiful daughter, and I have nothing but a corner office and a trust fund. You son of a..." "There's more." Vincent held up a hand before Alexander could stand. "The photographs of Elise. I've had those for 2 years. I hired the same investigator to dig up dirt on your wife after she died, thinking I might need leverage someday." The room seemed to tilt on its axis. "You've been planning this for 2 years?" "Not planning. Preparing. I knew you'd eventually find someone who mattered, and I wanted to be ready to take her away from you." Vincent's voice cracked. "I thought if I could prove that everyone you loved was flawed, you'd, I don't know, be as miserable as I am." Alexander stood slowly, his voice deadly quiet. "Get out. Alex, I know I screwed up. Get out." Alexander's roar could probably be heard 3 floors down. "You're fired. Your equity is forfeit. And if you ever come near my family again, I'll destroy you so completely you'll wish you'd never been born." Vincent scrambled toward the door like a man fleeing a fire. "I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't resurrect the relationships you've poisoned. It doesn't give me back the time I've wasted doubting the woman I love because of your lies." After Vincent left, Alexander sat alone in his office for a long time, staring out at the city that had always been his kingdom. Everything Vincent had told him about Margot, every seed of doubt he'd planted, every reason Alexander had found to question her, it was all manipulation. Poison designed to drive them apart. And it had worked. He grabbed his keys and ran for the elevator. He had a woman to find, an apology to make, and a future to fight for. Sarah's apartment building was in Brooklyn Heights, 45 minutes from Manhattan in traffic. Alexander made it in 28, his driver weaving through lanes while he clutched his phone, calling Margot's number over and over. Straight to voicemail every time. He took the stairs 3 at a time to the 4th floor, his heart hammering against his ribs. When Sarah opened the door, her face was pale with worry. "She's not here, Alexander." "What do you mean she's not here?" "She left this morning. Said she needed to clear her head. Think about what came next." Sarah stepped aside to let him in. "She was bleeding, Alexander. Not much, just spotting, but with the stress." The words hit him like bullets. "Bleeding. I told her to go to the hospital, but she said she needed space first. She drove toward the Catskills, said something about a place her father used to take her camping." Alexander's legs nearly gave out. Margot was alone, possibly losing their baby, because he'd been too much of a coward to trust her. "Do you know where?" "Bear Mountain State Park, I think." "But Alexander, that was 8 hours ago, and it's getting dark." The drive to Bear Mountain took forever and no time at all. Alexander called ahead to the park rangers, mobilized his security team, even contacted the local hospitals. His hands shook on the steering wheel as he navigated winding mountain roads in the growing darkness. He found her car in a nearly empty parking lot overlooking the Hudson River. Her Honda Civic sat alone under a flickering streetlight, and through the passenger window, he could see a crumpled tissue stained with blood. The rangers found her 20 minutes later, sitting on a bench beside the river with her knees drawn up to her chest. She looked so small against the vast darkness of the water, so fragile that Alexander was afraid to breathe too hard when he approached. "Hey," he said softly. Margot looked up at him with red-rimmed eyes. "How did you find me?" "Sarah told me about your dad bringing you here." He sat down carefully beside her, leaving space between them. "Are you okay?" "The bleeding stopped a few hours ago." "False alarm, probably. Stress-related." Her voice was flat, exhausted. "I called my doctor. She said it happens sometimes in early pregnancy." Alexander exhaled a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "Thank God. I needed to think. About us, about what comes next. About whether I have the strength to keep fighting for someone who's always going to doubt me." "Margot." "No, let me finish." She turned to face him, and in the moonlight her eyes looked like dark water. "I understand why you question me. I have a complicated past. I've made mistakes. I've hurt people I loved. But I can't keep defending myself every time someone from my history surfaces." "You shouldn't have to." "Then why do I?" Alexander felt shame burn in his chest like acid. "Because I'm broken. Because losing Elise broke something in me that I don't know how to fix. I'm broken too, Alexander. We're both broken. But I thought maybe together we could be something whole. We can be." He reached for her hand, relieved when she didn't pull away. "Vincent confessed. Everything, the phone calls, the investigation, manipulating me to doubt you. He's been planning this for months." Margot's intake of breath was sharp. "Vincent did all that? He's in love with you. Was jealous that you chose me instead of him. So he decided to systematically destroy our relationship by feeding me just enough poison to make you look suspicious. And you believed him. I wanted to believe you. But every time I started to trust completely, another piece of information would surface, and I'd spiral into doubt again." Alexander's voice cracked. "I was so afraid of being hurt again that I hurt the person I love most." They sat in silence, listening to the river lap against the shore below. Finally, Margot spoke. "I'm tired of being tested, Alexander. Tired of having to prove I'm worthy of love. You don't have to prove anything. Not to me, not to anyone." "Then why does it feel like I do?" Alexander didn't have an answer for that. Or rather, he had an answer he didn't want to face, that his own fear was turning him into someone who demanded perfection from others while accepting none of his own flaws. "I found out about Elise's affair," he said suddenly. Margot turned to him, surprised. "What?" Vincent had been sitting on photographs for 2 years. Elise was seeing someone else for months before she died. He pulled out his phone and showed her the pictures. "My perfect wife wasn't perfect. My perfect marriage was a lie." Margot looked at the images with sadness rather than satisfaction. "I'm sorry. I'm not. Not anymore." Alexander put the phone away. "Because it made me realize I was holding you to standards I never held her to. I overlooked her flaws because I loved her, but I've been scrutinizing every detail of your past like evidence in a trial." "Why?" "Because you're alive. Because loving you means risking loss again. Because with Elise, the worst had already happened. She was gone, safe from disappointing me further. But with you," he swallowed hard. "With you, I could still lose everything." Margot was quiet for a long moment. "And the baby? I want this baby. I want you. I want us." His voice broke completely. "I want to stop being so terrified of losing people that I push them away first." She studied his face in the moonlight, looking for lies or false promises. Whatever she found there must have been enough, because she leaned against his shoulder. "I'm scared too," she whispered. "Of what?" "Of not being enough. Of you realizing someday that I'm just a trauma nurse from Chicago with too much baggage and not enough polish for your world." Alexander wrapped his arms around her. "You saved my daughter's life. You brought me back to life. You're carrying my baby. How could you possibly not be enough?" They drove back to Manhattan together. Margot's car left behind to be retrieved later. The pregnancy had made her nauseated, So Alexander drove slowly, stopping twice for her to sip ginger ale and eat crackers. When did you know? He asked as they crossed the Tappan Zee Bridge. Know what? That you loved me. Margot smiled for the first time in days. The night you made me grilled cheese at 2 a.m. because I was craving comfort food after a particularly bad shift. You burned the first 2 sandwiches because you were so nervous about getting it right. I wanted to take care of you. No one had ever wanted to take care of me before. Not like that. Not without expecting something in return. Alexander reached over and took her hand. What about you? When did you know I loved you? The morning after we first spent the night together. I woke up and you were gone, and for about 30 seconds I thought you'd left. Then I heard you in the kitchen making coffee and singing badly to some song on the radio. And I realized you weren't going anywhere. Sweet Caroline. I was singing Sweet Caroline. Terribly. But it was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. They were quiet for a while, hands linked across the center console, watching the city lights grow brighter ahead of them. I want to do this right, Alexander said finally. Do what right? Everything. Us. The baby. The future. He glanced at her. I want to marry you, Margot. Not because you're pregnant, not because of what other people will think, but because I can't imagine a life without you in it. Margot was quiet for so long that Alexander started to worry he'd pushed too hard, too fast. Ask me again when we're both sure we can trust each other, she said finally. When we're both done running from our ghosts. How will we know when that is? We'll know. 3 weeks later, at Margot's 12-week ultrasound, they heard their baby's heartbeat for the first time. The sound filled the examination room. Quick, strong, determined. Everything looks perfect, Dr. Martinez said, pointing to the grainy image on the monitor. Due date is still on track for early April. Alexander squeezed Margot's hand as they stared at the screen. Their child looked like a tiny alien, all head and promise, but it was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. Can you tell the sex yet? Margot asked. Too early, but we'll know at the next appointment. As they walked out of the medical building, Margot suddenly stopped on the sidewalk. What's wrong? Alexander asked. Nothing. I keep waiting for something terrible to happen. For this to be too good to be true. Nothing terrible is going to happen. But even as he said it, Alexander felt a chill of foreboding. He'd learned not to trust happiness completely. It had a way of being snatched away when you least expected it. That afternoon, his worst fears seemed prophetic. Marcus Chen called with news that made Alexander's blood turn cold. Vincent Hale didn't just disappear after you fired him, Marcus said. He's been busy, drunk, bitter, and talking to reporters about your relationship with Ms. Bennett. What kind of reporters? The kind that pay for dirt on billionaires. He's shopping a story about how she targeted you through him, about her past in Chicago, about the dead patient. He's got documents, photos, financial records showing the settlement she received. Alexander closed his eyes. How long before it publishes? The Post wants to run it tomorrow. Front page, probably. Alexander hung up and called Margot immediately. We need to talk, he said. Can you come home? I'm already on my way. When she arrived, Alexander was pacing his office like a caged animal. Vincent is selling our story to the tabloids, he said without preamble. All of it, your past, Chicago, Danny Morrison, the lawsuit. It's going to be front page news tomorrow. Margot sank into a chair, her face going pale. Oh God. I can try to kill the story, but Vincent has documentation. If the Post doesn't run it, someone else will. What does this mean for us? Alexander knelt in front of her chair, taking her hands in his. It means the next few weeks are going to be hell. Reporters, photographers, speculation about whether you're a gold digger or I'm a fool. But it doesn't change anything between us. It changes everything, Alexander. Your reputation, your business, Lily's privacy. None of that matters. It matters to me. Margot stood up, starting to pace herself. I can't be the reason your world falls apart. I can't be the scandal that follows Lily to school, that costs you clients, that turns your life into a circus. So what are you saying? Margot stopped pacing and looked at him with tears in her eyes. Maybe I should disappear for a while. Until the story dies down. Absolutely not. Alexander. No. I'm not losing you again because other people want to turn our love story into their entertainment. He stood up, his voice fierce. We face this together, or we don't face it at all. Margot searched his face, looking for cracks in his resolve. You might hate me when this is over. When you see what the media does to people like us. I could never hate you. You say that now. I'll say it tomorrow too. And the day after that. And every day until you believe me. The New York Post hit the stands at 5 a.m. with a headline that made Alexander's stomach turn. Billionaire's baby mama. Nurse's deadly past exposed. The story was worse than he'd imagined. Vincent had given them everything. Photos of Margot from her Chicago days, details about Danny Morrison's death, speculation about her motives for dating Alexander. They painted her as a calculating woman who targeted wealthy men, who had a history of inappropriate relationships with patients. By 7 a.m., photographers were camped outside Alexander's building. By 8 a.m., they were outside Margot's hospital. By noon, the story had gone viral on social media, with hashtags like #GoldDiggerNurse and #BillionairesBeware trending on Twitter. Margot called in sick to work. The hospital administrator said it was probably best until the story died down. She spent the day in Alexander's penthouse, watching her life get dissected by strangers on television. Former colleague says Bennett was always ambitious, one reporter said on the evening news. Friends from Chicago describe her as charming but calculating. Turn it off, Alexander said, reaching for the remote. No. I need to see this. I need to know what people are saying. What people were saying was brutal. The comment sections were filled with speculation about her motives, her character, her fitness as a mother. Women who had never met her called her a scheming opportunist. Men who knew nothing about her past made crude jokes about her bedside manner. This is what I was afraid of, Margot said quietly. This is why I wanted to protect you from my history. None of this is true. It doesn't matter if it's true. It matters that people believe it. Alexander pulled her close, feeling her shoulders shake with silent tears. It'll pass. Stories like this always do. But privately, he wondered if their relationship could survive this kind of scrutiny. If love was strong enough to withstand having your most private moments turned into public sport. The assault on Margot's character continued for days. Every tabloid had a new angle, a fresh way to dissect her past and speculate about her motives. Alexander hired the best crisis management team in the city, but there was only so much they could do against a story that had already taken on a life of its own. The worst part was watching what it did to Margot. She stopped eating properly, stopped sleeping, jumped every time her phone rang. The stress was taking a toll on her pregnancy. She'd had 2 more episodes of spotting, each one sending them to the emergency room in a panic. Maybe they're right, she said one evening as they watched yet another news segment about their relationship. Maybe I am damaged goods. Maybe you'd be better off with someone who doesn't come with so much baggage. Don't you dare, Alexander said fiercely. Don't let them get in your head. How can I not? They're tearing apart everything I've ever done, everyone I've ever loved. They're making Danny's death into entertainment. Alexander turned off the television and pulled her into his arms. Do you know what I see when I look at you? What? I see the woman who knelt in broken glass to save my daughter. I see someone who's spent her entire career helping people heal. I see the strongest, most compassionate person I've ever known. He tilted her chin up so she had to meet his eyes. I see the mother of my child and the love of my life. Even after all this? Especially after all this. Because now I know for certain that you're not with me for my money or my status. You're with me despite those things, despite the circus they create. For the first time in days, Margot smiled. You really believe that? I know it. That night, Alexander made a decision. If the media wanted to treat their love story like a spectacle, he'd give them one they'd never forget. Alexander called a press conference for the next morning. His publicist advised against it, his lawyers said it was a mistake, but he didn't care. He was done letting other people control the narrative about the woman he loved. The ballroom at the Plaza Hotel was packed with reporters, cameras, and curiosity seekers. Alexander took the podium at exactly 10 a.m., looking every inch the billionaire CEO in his perfectly tailored suit. But when he spoke, his voice was that of a man in love. I called this press conference to set the record straight about Margot Bennett, he began. You've heard a lot of stories about her in the past week. Let me tell you the only one that matters. He told them about the night on the Brooklyn Bridge, about finding Margot kneeling beside his injured daughter in the rain. He told them about her steady hands, her calm voice, her refusal to leave until she knew Lily was safe. This is a woman who has dedicated her life to healing others, he said, who has worked in trauma units from Chicago to New York, saving lives and mending broken bodies. She's not perfect. None of us are. She's made mistakes, faced tragedy, survived loss. That doesn't make her calculating. It makes her human. He talked about their courtship, about how slowly and carefully they'd built their relationship, about her reluctance to let him into her life, her insistence on maintaining her independence. If Margot Bennett is a gold digger, Alexander said, she's the worst one in history. She's refused every expensive gift I've tried to give her. She kept her own apartment for months. She pays for her own groceries, drives her own car, and insists on splitting dinner checks. The only thing she's ever taken from me is my heart, and I gave that freely. Finally, he looked directly into the main camera. Margot is carrying my child. In 5 months, we're going to welcome a baby into this world. That child deserves better than to grow up hearing lies about their mother. Margot deserves better than to have her past weaponized against her by people who've never met her. He paused, his voice becoming even more intense. To Vincent Hale, who started this campaign of character assassination, you lost. She didn't choose you, and destroying her won't change that. To the reporters who've turned our love story into a blood sport, you're better than this. And to anyone who thinks they know Margot Bennett based on gossip and speculation, you don't know her at all. Alexander stepped away from the podium without taking questions, leaving the room buzzing with surprise and grudging respect. The press conference changed everything. Within hours, the narrative began to shift. Other people who knew Margot started speaking out, former colleagues who talked about her dedication, patients she'd helped, fellow nurses who described her as the first person to volunteer for the worst shifts. Dr. Patricia Williams, who had supervised Margot in Chicago, gave an interview that went viral. Margot Bennett is one of the finest nurses I've ever worked with. What happened with Daniel Morrison was a tragedy, but it wasn't her fault. She followed protocol, provided excellent care, and when he died, she was as devastated as his family. The lawsuit was about grief and blame, not malpractice. Even some of the original critics began to reconsider. A female columnist who had initially called Margot a gold digger wrote a follow-up piece titled, "Maybe We Got It Wrong." Alexander Wolf's press conference was either the performance of a lifetime or the words of a man genuinely in love. Watching him speak about Bennett, seeing the emotion in his eyes, I find myself believing the latter. The photographers still camped outside their building. The gossip shows still dissected their relationship, but the tone had changed. Instead of predator and prey, they were being portrayed as a couple under siege, fighting to protect their love against outside forces. It's working, Margot said, reading the latest articles on her phone. People are starting to see our side. I told you it would. No, you told me you'd fight for us. There's a difference. She looked at him with something like wonder. I've never had anyone fight for me before. Get used to it. That evening, they had their first quiet dinner in weeks. No photographers outside. No emergency phone calls from publicists. No crisis meetings with lawyers. Just two people sharing takeout Chinese food and talking about baby names. What about Emma for a girl? Margot suggested. After your sister? She would have been an amazing aunt. Alexander reached across the table and took her hand. Emma it is. And for a boy? What was your father's name? Robert. But he hated it. Everyone called him Bobby. Bobby Wolf. I like it. They were building something together. Not just a relationship, but a family. A future that could survive scandal, doubt, and all the ways the world tried to tear love apart. 2 months later, on a quiet Sunday morning in February, Alexander woke to find Margot sitting by the bedroom window, one hand on her growing belly, watching snow fall over Central Park. How long have you been awake? He asked. A while. The baby's active today. She smiled as she felt a kick. I think she's going to be a soccer player. Intuition. What do you think? Alexander joined her at the window, wrapping his arms around her from behind. I think I don't care as long as they're healthy. Liar. You want a boy. I want whatever you're carrying. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the city wake up under its blanket of snow. At 18 weeks pregnant, Margot was just starting to show, her body changing in ways that filled Alexander with protective tenderness. I have something for you, he said suddenly. Alexander, we agreed no expensive gifts. It's not expensive. Well, it is, but that's not the point. He disappeared into his closet and returned with a small velvet box. I've been carrying this around for weeks, waiting for the right moment. Margot's eyes widened as he dropped to one knee beside her chair. Margot Elizabeth Bennet, he said, opening the box to reveal a simple, elegant diamond ring. You've survived my doubt, my fears, and Vincent's sabotage. You've weathered a media storm that would have destroyed lesser people. You've shown me what real love looks like. Not perfect, not easy, but absolutely worth fighting for. Tears were already streaming down her face. I don't want to wait until we're sure we can trust each other, because I already know I can trust you with everything that matters to me. Will you marry me? Margot looked at the ring, then at his face, then back at the ring. Are you asking because I'm pregnant? I'm asking because I can't imagine a future without you in it. Because you make me want to be the man you see when you look at me. Because our baby deserves parents who are crazy about each other. What about the media? The scrutiny? The fact that dating me turned your life upside down. Let them watch. Let them speculate. Let them write whatever they want. Alexander's voice was fierce with certainty. I'd rather have a complicated life with you than a simple one without you. Margot wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. You really mean that? I've never meant anything more. She held out her left hand. Then yes, Alexander Wolf. Yes, I'll marry you. The ring fit perfectly. He'd gotten her size from a ring she'd left on his nightstand weeks ago. As he slipped it onto her finger, Alexander felt something settle in his chest, like a lock clicking into place. I love you, he said. I love you too. Both of you, she added, looking down at her belly. Both of us. You and whoever's in here. You're a package deal now. Alexander kissed her then, soft and sure, tasting tears and snowflakes and the promise of everything they were building together. Their daughter was born on April 15th at 3:47 a.m., after 12 hours of labor that left Alexander feeling more helpless than any hostile takeover or contentious board meeting ever had. Emma Rose Wolf came into the world screaming, tiny fists clenched, already fighting. She's perfect, Margot whispered, exhausted but radiant as she held their daughter for the first time. Alexander stared at the tiny person they'd created, all wrinkled red skin and dark hair and fierce determination. She looks just like you. She looks like trouble. Definitely takes after her mother then. Lily was the first visitor, arriving with a carefully selected teddy bear and barely contained excitement. "Can I hold her?" she asked. "Very carefully," Margot said, helping position Emma in Lily's arms. Alexander watched his two daughters together, one 9 years old and wise beyond her years, the other brand new and full of possibility, and felt his heart expand in ways he hadn't known were possible. "She's so little," Lily whispered in wonder. "You were this little once." "Really? Really? And just as beautiful." That evening, after the visitors had gone and Emma was sleeping in the bassinet beside Margot's hospital bed, Alexander found himself thinking about the night that had brought them together. The rain, the twisted metal, the woman kneeling in broken glass who had saved more than just his daughter's life. "What are you thinking about?" Margot asked, catching him staring into space. "The accident. How different everything would be if you hadn't been working that night." "But I was." "But you almost weren't. You told me once you'd been planning to leave early that day." Margot adjusted Emma in her arms, studying their daughter's sleeping face. "I was supposed to have dinner with a friend. But then there was a last-minute trauma, and I stayed to help. Sarah said I was crazy for missing dinner for work." "Thank God you're crazy." "Sometimes I think Emma, my sister Emma, had something to do with it. Like she knew you and Lily needed me that night." Alexander didn't believe in fate or guardian angels or any of the mystical explanations people use to make sense of random events. But sitting in that hospital room, watching the woman he loved hold their newborn daughter, he found himself willing to believe in something larger than coincidence. Some love stories were planned, orchestrated, predictable. But the best ones, the ones that lasted, began in chaos. They began with two broken people who decided that maybe together they could build something whole from the pieces. They began with blood on your hands and someone brave enough to stay. Emma Wolf was in indeed trouble, just as her mother had predicted. At 5 years old, she had Alexander's stubbornness, Margot's compassion, and Lily's mischievous streak. She collected stray animals, asked uncomfortable questions at inappropriate times, and had a laugh that could make the grumpiest person smile. They'd bought a house in Westchester with a big yard and too many bedrooms. Margot worked part-time at the local hospital. Alexander had started a foundation for trauma victims, and they'd learned to fight better, forgive faster, and trust deeper. On the anniversary of the Brooklyn Bridge accident, now Emma's birthday too, they visited the memorial they'd erected at the crash site. It was a small plaque embedded in the bridge walkway, barely noticeable unless you knew to look for it. "In memory of all lives touched by tragedy, and in gratitude for the healers who kneel in the wreckage to help strangers home." "Tell me the story again," Emma demanded as they stood beside the plaque. "Which story?" Alexander asked, though he knew. "How you and Mama met." So Alexander told her about the rain and the twisted cars and the woman in blood-stained scrubs who had steady hands and a voice like comfort itself. He told her about how love sometimes begins not with music and flowers, but with crisis and courage and the willingness to stay when everyone else runs. Emma listened with rapt attention, even though she'd heard the story dozens of times. At 5, she was already showing signs of her mother's calling. Bandaging her doll's imaginary wounds, fixing broken toys with serious concentration. "And then what happened?" she prompted even though she knew. "Then we fell in love. Then we had you. Then we lived happily ever after." "Not ever after," Emma corrected with 5-year-old precision. "Happily right now." Alexander looked at Margot, who was watching their daughter with eyes full of wonder and exhaustion and fierce protective love. At Lily, now 14 and mortified by her family's public displays of affection, but secretly pleased to be part of something so solid. At Emma, who had never known a world where her parents didn't love each other desperately. "You're right," he said. "Happily right now. Because some love stories don't end with a kiss or a sunset or a promise of forever. The best ones don't end at all, They just keep beginning over and over. Every time you choose each other despite the fear, despite the doubt, despite all the ways the world tries to tear love apart. They keep beginning every time you decide to stay. The end. If you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe to my channel. This gives me motivation to continue posting these amazing stories. What do you think of today's story? Was it worth watching? Was it interesting? Share your suggestions in the comments below. Writing comment just takes 2 seconds, but it makes my day.